Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start first with The Veiled Lady from Poirot Investigates by Agatha Christie. I had noticed that for some time Poirot had been growing increasingly dissatisfied and restless. We had had no interesting cases of late, nothing on which my little friend could exercise his keen wits and remarkable powers of deduction. This morning, he flung down the newspaper with an impatient chow, a favorite exclamation of his, which sounded exactly like a cat sneezing. They fear me, Hastings, the criminals of your England. They fear me. When the cat is there, the little mice, they come no more to the cheese. I don't suppose the greater part of them ever knew of your existence, I said, laughing. Poirot looked at me reproachfully. He always imagines that the whole world is thinking of talking of Hercule Poirot. He has certainly made a name for himself in London, and I could hardly believe that his existence struck terror into the criminal world. What about the daylight robbery of jewels in Bond Street the other day? I asked. A neat coup, Poirot said approvingly. Oh, not in my line. Pas de finesse, seulement de la police. A man with a loaded cane smashes the plate glass window of a jeweler's shop and grabs a number of precious stones. Worthy citizens immediately seize him. Policemen arrive. He is caught red-handed with the jewels on him. He is marched off to the police station. And then it is discovered that the stones are gone. He has passed the real ones to a Confederate, and the police find only paste. The Confederate was one of the aforementioned worthy citizens. He will go to prison, true, but when he comes out, there will be a nice little fortune awaiting him. Yes, not badly imagined, but I could do better than that. Yes. Sometimes, Hastings, I regret that I have such a moral disposition to work against the law. It would be pleasing for a change. Cheer up, Poirot. You know you are unique in your own line. What is there on hand in my own line? I picked up the paper. Here's an Englishman mysteriously done to death in Holland, I said. Ah, they always say that. And later they find that he ate the tinned fish and that his death is perfectly natural. Well, if you're determined to grouse. Tiens, said Poirot, who had strolled across the window. Here in the street is what they call in novels heavily veiled lady. She mounts the steps. She rings the bell. She comes to consult us. Here is a possibility of something interesting. When one is as young and as pretty as that one does not veil the face except for a big affair. A minute later, the visitor was ushered in. As Perrault had said, she was indeed heavily veiled. It was impossible to distinguish her features until she raised her veil of black Spanish lace. Then I saw that Poirot's intuition had been correct. The lady was extremely pretty, with fair hair and large blue eyes. From the costly simplicity of her attire, I deduced at once that she belonged to the upper strata of society. Monsieur Poirot, said the lady in a soft, musical voice, I am in great trouble. I can hardly believe that you can help me, but I have heard such wonderful things of you that I come literally as a last hope to beg you to do the impossible. Ah, the impossible. It pleases me always, said Poirot. Continue, I beg of you, mademoiselle. Our fair guest hesitated. Ah, but you must be frank, added Poirot. You must not leave me in the dark on any point. I will trust you, the girl said suddenly. You have heard of Lady Millicent Castlevaughn? I looked up with keen interest. The announcement of Lady Millicent's engagement to the young Duke of Southshire had appeared a few days previously. She was, I knew, the fifth daughter of an impecunious Irish peer, and the Duke of Southshire was one of the best matches in England. I am Lady Millicent, continued the girl. You may have read of my engagement. I should be one of the happiest girls alive, but oh, Monsieur Poirot, I am in terrible trouble. There is a man, a horrible man. His name is Lavington, and I hardly know how to tell you. There was a letter I wrote. I was only 16 at the time, and a letter that you wrote to this Mr. Lavington. Oh, no, not to him, to a young soldier. I was very fond of him. He was killed in the war. I understand, said Poirot kindly. It was a foolish letter, an indiscreet letter, but indeed, Monsieur Poirot, nothing more. But there are phrases in it which might bear a different interpretation. I see, said Poirot, and this letter has come into the possession of Mr. Lavington. Yes, and he threatens unless I pay him an enormous sum of money, a sum that is quite impossible for me to raise, to send it to the Duke. The dirty swine, I cried. I beg your pardon, Lady Millicent. Would it not be better to confess all to your future husband? I dare not, Monsieur Poirot. The Duke is a rather peculiar character, jealous and suspicious and prone to believe the worst. I might as well break off my engagement at once. Dear, dear, said Poirot with an expressive grimace. And what do you want me to do, milady? I thought that perhaps I might ask Mr. Lavington to call upon you. I would tell him that you were empowered by me to discuss the matter. Perhaps you could reduce his demands. What sum does he mention? £20,000. This is the 1930s. An impossibility. I doubt if I could raise 1,000 even. You might perhaps borrow the money on the prospect of your approaching marriage, but I doubt if you could get hold of half that sum. Besides, eh bien, it is repugnant to me that you should pay. No, no. The ingenuity of Hercule Poirot shall defeat your enemies. Send me this Mr. Lavington. Is he likely to bring the letter with him? The girl shook her head. I do not think so. He is very cautious. I suppose that there is no doubt he really has it. He showed it to me when I went to his house. You went to his house? That was very imprudent, milady. Was it? I was so desperate. I hoped my entreaties might move him. Oh, la la. The Lavingtons of this world are not moved by entreaties. He would welcome them, as showing how much importance you attach to the document. Where does he live, this fine gentleman? At Buena Vista, Wimbledon. I went there after dark. Poirot groaned. I declared that I would inform the police in the end, but he only laughed in a horrid, sneering manner. By all means, my dear Lady Millicent, he said, do so as if you wish. Yes, it is hardly a matter for the police, murmured Poirot. But I think you will be wiser than that, he continued. See, here is your letter in this little Chinese puzzle box. He held it so that I could see. I tried to snatch it, but he was too quick for me. With a horrid smile, he folded it up and replaced it in the little wooden box. It will be quite safe here, I assure you, he said. And the box itself lives in such a clever place that you would never find it. My eyes turned to the small wall safe, and he shook his head and laughed. I have a better safe. I have a better safe place than that, he said. Oh, he was odious, Mr. Poirot. Do you think you can help me? I've faith in Papa Poirot. I will find a way. These reassurances were all very well, I thought, as Poirot gallantly ushered his fair client down the stairs. But it seemed to me that we had a tough nut to crack. I said as much to Poirot when he returned. He nodded ruefully. Yes, the solution does not lead to the eye. He has the whip hand, this Monsieur Lavington. For the moment, I do not see how we can circumvent him. Mr. Lavington duly called upon us that afternoon. Lady Millicent had spoken truly when she described him as an odious man. I felt a positive tingling in the end of my boot. So keen was I to kick him down the stairs. He was blustering and overbearing in a manner, laughed at Mr. Poirot's gentle suggestions to scorn, and generally showed himself as master of the situation. I could not help feeling that Poirot was hardly appearing at his best. He looked discouraged and crestfallen. Well, gentlemen, said Lavington as he took up his hat, we don't seem to be getting much farther. The case stands like this. I'll let the Lady Millicent off cheap, as she is such a charming young lady, he leered obviously. We'll say £18,000. I'm off to Paris today, a little piece of business to attend over there. I shall be back on Tuesday. Unless the money is paid by Tuesday evening, the letter goes to the Duke. Don't tell me Lady Millicent can't raise the money. Some of her gentlemen friends would be only too willing to oblige such a pretty woman with a loan, if she goes the right way about it. My face flushed, and I took a step forward, but Lavington had wheeled out of the room as he finished his sentence. My God, I cried, something has to be done. You seem to be taking this lying down, Poirot. You have an excellent heart, my friend, but your gray cells are in deplorable condition. I have no wish to impress Mr. Lavington with my capabilities. The more pusillanimous he thinks me, the better. Why? It is curious, murmured Poirot innocently, that I should have uttered a wish to work against the law just before Lady Millicent arrived. You are going to burgle his house while he is away, I guess? Sometimes, Hastings, your mental processes are amazingly quick. Suppose he takes the letter with him. Poe shook his head. That is very unlikely. He has evidently a hiding place in his house that he fancies to be pretty impregnable. When do we do the deed? Tomorrow night. We will start from here about 11 o'clock. As time appointed, I was ready to set off. I had donned a dark suit and a soft dark hat. Poirot being kindly on me. You dressed the part, I see, he observed. Come, let us take the underground to Wilmington. Aren't we going to take anything with us? Tools to break in with? My dear Hastings, Poirot does not adopt such crude methods. I retired snubbed, but my curiosity was alert. It was just midnight that we entered a suburban garden of Buena Vista. The house was dark and silent. Poirot went straight to a window at the back of the house, raised the sash noiselessly, and bade me enter. Oh, did you know this window would be opened? I whispered. But really, it seemed uncanny. Of course, I saw it through the catch this morning. What? But yet, it was the most simple. I called, presented a fictitious card, and one of Inspector Japp's official ones. I said I had been sent, recommended by Scotland Yard, to attend to some burglar-proof fastenings that Mr. Lavington wanted fixed while he was away. The housekeeper welcomed me with great enthusiasm. It seems they had had two attempted burglaries here lately. Evidently, our little idea has occurred to other clients of Mr. Lavington's, and they had nothing of value taken. I examined all the windows, made my little arrangement, forbade the servants to touch the windows until tomorrow, as they were electrically connected up, and withdrew gracefully. Really, Poirot, you are wonderful. Mon ami, it was of the simplest. Now to work. The servants sleep at the top of the house, so we will run little risk of disturbing them. I presume the safe is built into the wall somewhere. Safe? Fiddlesticks. There is no safe. Mr. Lavington is an intelligent man. You will see he will have devised a hiding place much more intelligent than a safe. The safe is the first thing everyone looks for. Whereupon he began a systematic search of the entire place. But after several hours, ransacking of the house, our search had been unavailing. I saw symptoms of anger growing on Poirot's face. Ah, is Hercule Poirot to be beaten? Never. Let us be calm. Let us reflect. Let us reason. Let us, enfin, employ our little gray cells. He paused for some moments, bending his brows in concentration. Then the green light I knew so well stole into his eyes. I have been an imbecile. The kitchen. The kitchen, I cried. But that's impossible. The servants. Exactly. Just what 99 people out of 100 would say. And for that very reason, the kitchen is the ideal place to choose. It is full of various homeless objects. Enfin, to the kitchen. I followed him, completely skeptical, and watched once he dived into bread bins, tapped saucepans, and put his head into the gas oven. In the end, tired of watching him, I strolled back to the study. I was convinced that there and only there would we find the cash. I made a farther search, noted that it was now 4:15, and that therefore it would soon be growing light, and then went back into the kitchen regions. To my utter amazement, Poirot was now standing right inside the coal bin. To the utter ruin of his neat suit, he made a grimace. But yes, my friend, it is against all my instincts so to ruin my appearance. But Lavington couldn't have buried it under the coal. If you would use your eyes, you would see that it is not the coal I examined. I then saw that on a shelf behind the coal bunker, some logs of wool were piled. Poirot was dexterously taking them down one by one. Suddenly, he uttered a low exclamation. Your knife, Hastings. I handed it to him. He appeared to insert it in the wood, and suddenly the log split in two. It had been neatly sawn in half, and a cavity hollowed out in the center. From this cavity, Poirot took a little wooden box of Chinese make. Well done, I cried. Gently, Hastings. Do not raise your voice too much. Let us be off before the daylight is upon us. Slipping the box into his pocket, he leaped lightly out of the coal bunker, brushed himself down as well as he could, and leaving the house by the same way as we had come, we walked rapidly in the direction of London. But what an extraordinary place, I expostulated. Anyone might have used the log. in July, Hastings, and it was at the bottom of the pile. A very ingenious hiding place. Ah, here is a taxi. Now for home, a wash, and a refreshing sleep. After the excitements of the night, I slept late. When I finally strolled into our sitting room just before 1 o'clock, I was surprised to see Poirot leaning back in an armchair, the Chinese box open beside him, calmly reading the letter he had taken from it. He smiled at me affectionately and tapped the sheet he held. She was right, the Lady Millicent. Never would the Duke have pardoned this letter. It contains some of the most extravagant terms of affection I have ever come across. Really, Poirot, I said rather disgustedly. I don't think you should have read the letter. That's the sort of thing that isn't done. It is done by Hercule Poirot, replied my friend. And another thing I said, I don't think using Jap's official card yesterday was quite playing the game. But I was not playing a game, Hastings. I was conducting a case. I shrugged my shoulder. One can't argue with the points of view. A step on the stairs, said Poirot. That will be the Lady Millicent. Our fair client came in with an anxious expression on her face, which changed to one of delight on seeing the letter and the box which Poirot held up. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, how wonderful of you! How did you do it? By rather reprehensible methods, lady, but Mr. Babington will not prosecute. This is your letter, is it not? She glanced through it. Oh, yes. How can I ever thank you? You are a wonderful, wonderful man. Where was it hidden? Poirot told her. How very clever of you. She took up the small box from the table. I shall keep this as a souvenir. I had hoped, Lady, that you would permit me to keep it as a souvenir. I hope to send you a better souvenir than that on my wedding day. You shall not find me ungrateful, Monsieur Poirot. The pleasure of doing you a service will be more to me than a check. So you permit that I retain the box. Oh no, Monsieur Poirot, I simply must have that, she said laughingly. She stretched out her hand, but Poirot was before her. His hands closed over it. I think not. His voice had changed. What do you mean? Her voice seemed to have grown sharper. At any rate, permit me to abstract its further contents. You observe that the original cavity has been reduced by half. In the top half, the compromising letter. In the bottom, he made a nimble gesture and held out his hand. On the palm were four large glittering stones and two big milky white pearls. The jewels stolen in Bond Street the other day, I rather fancy, murmured Poirot. Jack will tell us. To my utter amazement, Jack himself stepped out from Poirot's bedroom. An old friend of yours, I believe, said Poirot, pointing to Lady Millicent. Nagged by the letter, said Lady Millicent with a complete change of manner. You nippy old devil. She looked at Poirot with almost affectionate awe. Well, Gertie, my dear, said Jack, the game's up. This time I fancy seeing you here so soon. We've got your pal, too, the gentleman who called here the other day, calling himself Lavington. As for Lavington himself, alias Crocker, alias Reed, I wonder which of the gang it was who stuck a knife into him the other day in Holland. Thought he got the goods with him, didn't you? And he hadn't. He double-crossed you properly. Hit him in his own house. You had two fellows looking looking for them. And then you tackle Monsieur Poirot here, and by a piece of amazing luck, you found them. You do like talking, don't you? Said the lady, Millicent. Easy there now. I'll go quietly. You can't say I'm not the perfect lady. Ta-ta, all. The shoes were wrong, said Poirot dreamingly, while I was still too stupefied to speak. I had made my little observations of your English nation, and a lady, a born lady, is always particular about her shoes. She may have shabby clothes, but she will be well shod. Now, this Lady Millicent had smart, expensive clothes and cheap shoes. It was not likely that either you or I should have seen the real Lady Millicent. She has been very little in London, and this girl did have a certain superficial resemblance which would pass well enough. As I said, the shoes first awakened my suspicion, and then her story and her veil. A little melodramatic, eh? The Chinese box with the bogus comprising letter in the top must have been known to all the gang, but the log of wood was the late Mr. Lavington's own idea. And, par exemple, Hastings, I hope you will not again wound my feelings as you did yesterday by saying I am unknown to the criminal classes. Ma foi, they even employ me when they themselves fail. Case of the Siegal is short. Should I continue? Or do you feel you've had enough for the day? Continue, then I will do the case of the missing will. Okay, well, there's a sweet spot that's very hard to find. You move a millimeter and our second story is the case of the missing will. The problem presented to us by Miss Violet Marsh made rather a pleasant change from my usual routine work. Poirot had received a brisk and businesslike note from the lady asking for an appointment, and he had replied asking her to call upon him at 11 o'clock the following day. She arrived punctually, a tall, handsome woman, plainly but neatly dressed, with an assured and businesslike manner. Clearly, a young woman who meant to get on in the world. I am not a great admirer of the so-called new woman myself, and in spite of her good looks, I was not particularly prepossessed in her favor. My business is of somewhat unusual nature, Monsieur Poirot, she began, after she had accepted a chair. I had better begin at the beginning and tell you the whole story. If you please, mademoiselle, I am an orphan. My father was one of two brothers, sons of a small yeoman farmer in Devonshire. The farm was a poor one, and the elder brother, Andrew, emigrated to Australia, where he did very well indeed, and by means of speculation in land, became a very rich man. The younger brother, Roger, my father, had no leanings towards the agricultural life. He managed to educate himself a little and obtained a post as a clerk with a small firm. He married slightly above him. My father died when I was 6 years old. When I was 14, my mother followed me to the grave. My only living relation then was my uncle Andrew, who had recently returned from Australia and bought a small place, Crabtree Manor, in his native county. He was exceedingly kind to his brother's orphan child and took me to live with him and treated me in every way as though I was his own daughter. Crabtree Manor, in spite of its name, is really only an old farmhouse. Farming was in my uncle's blood, and he was intensely interested in various modern farming experiments. Although kindness steps to me, he had certain peculiar and deeply rooted ideas as to the upbringing of women. Himself a man of little or no education, though possessing remarkable shrewdness, he placed little value on what he called book knowledge. He was especially opposed to the education of women. In his opinion, girls should learn practical housework and dairy work, be useful about the home, and have as little to do with book learning as possible. Does this sound familiar? He proposed to bring me up on these lines to my bitter disappointment and annoyance. Frankly, I rebelled. I knew that I possessed a good brain and have absolutely no talent for domestic duties. My uncle and I had many bitter arguments on the subject, for though much attached to each other, we were both self-willed. I was lucky enough to win a scholarship and up to a certain point was successful in getting my own way. The crisis arose when I resolved to go to Girton. I had a little money of my own left me by my mother, and I was quite determined to make the best use of the gifts that God had given me. I had one long final argument with my uncle. He put the facts plainly before me. He had no other relations, and he intended me to be his sole heiress. As I have told you, he was a very rich man. But if I persisted in these newfangled notions of mine, however, I need look for nothing from him. I remained polite but firm. I should always be deeply attached to him, I told him, but I must lead my own life. We parted on that note. You fancy your brain, my girl, were his last words. I've no book learning, but for all that, I'll pit mine against yours any day. We'll see, as we shall see. That was 9 years ago. I have stayed with him for a weekend occasionally, and our relations were perfectly amicable, though his views remained unaltered. He never referred to my having matriculated, nor to my Bachelor of Science. For the last 3 years, his health had been failing, and a month ago he died. I am now coming to the point of my visit. My uncle left a most extraordinary will. By its term, Crabtree Manor and its contents are to be at my disposal for a year from his death, during which time, quote, my clever niece may prove her wits. At the end of that period, quote, my wits having proved better than hers, the house and all my uncle's large fortune passed to various charitable institutions. That's a little hard on you, mademoiselle. See, you were Mr. Marsh's only blood relation. I do not look upon it that way. Uncle Andrew warned me fairly, and I chose my own path. Since I would not fall in with his wishes, he was perfectly liberty to leave his money to whom he pleased. Was the will drawn up by a lawyer? No, it was written on a printed will form and witnessed by the man and wife who live in the house and do for my uncle. There might be a possibility of upsetting such a will. I would not dream of doing such a thing. You regard it then as a sporting challenge on the part of your uncle? That's exactly how I look upon it. It bears that interpretation, certainly, said Thoreau thoughtfully. Somewhere in this rambling old manor house, your uncle has concealed either a sum of money in notes or possibly a second will, and has given you a year in which to exercise your ingenuity to find it. Exactly, Monsieur Poirot. And I am paying you the compliment of assuming that your ingenuity will be greater than mine. Hey, but that is very charming of you. My gray cells are at your disposal. You have made no search yourself, only a cursory one, but I have too much respect for my uncle's undoubted abilities to fancy that the task will be an easy one. Have you the will or a copy of it with you? Miss Marsh handed a document across the table. Poirot ran through it, nodding to himself. Made 3 years ago, dated March 25th, and the time is given also, 11 a.m. That is very suggestive. It narrows the field of search. Assuredly, there is another will we have to seek for. A will made even half of an hour later would upset this. Eh bien, mademoiselle, it is a problem charming and ingenious that you have presented me here. I shall have all the pleasure in the world in solving it for you. Granted that your uncle was a man of ability, his great cells cannot have been the quality of Hercule Poirot. Really, Poirot's vanity is blatant. Fortunately, I have nothing of moment on hand. Hastings and I will go down to Crabtree Manor tonight. The man and wife who attended on your uncle are still there, I presume. Yes, their name is Baker. The following morning saw us start on the hunt proper. We had arrived late the night before. Mr. and Mrs. Baker, having received a telegram from Miss Marsh, were expecting us. They were a pleasant couple. The man gnarled and pink-cheeked like a shriveled pippin, and his wife, a woman of vast proportions and true Devonshire calm. Tired with our journey and the 8-mile drive from the station, we had retired at once to bed after a supper of roast chicken, apple pie, and Devonshire cream. We had now disposed of an excellent breakfast and were sitting in a small paneled room, which had been the late Mr. Marsh's study and living room. A roll-top desk stuffed with papers, all neatly docketed, stood against the wall, and a big leather armchair showed plainly that it had been its owner's constant resting place. A big chintz-colored covered settee ran along the opposite wall, and the deep low window seats were covered with the same faded chintz. "Eh bien, mon ami," said Poirot, lighting one of his tiny cigarettes. "We must map out our plan of campaign. Already I have made a rough survey of the house, but I am of opinion that any clue will be found in this room. We shall have to go through the documents in the desk with meticulous care. Naturally, I do not expect to find the will amongst them, but it is likely that some apparently innocent paper may conceal the clue to its hiding place. But first, we must have a little information. Ring the bell, I pray of you." I did so. While we were waiting for it to be answered, Poirot walked up and down, looking about him approvingly. "A man of method, this Mr. Marsh. See how neatly the packets of papers are docketed. Then the key to each drawer has its ivory label. So has the key of the china cabinet on the wall. And see with what precision the china within is arranged. It rejoices the heart. Nothing here offends the eye." He came to an abrupt pause as his eye was caught by the key of the desk itself, to which a dirty envelope was affixed. Poirot frowned at it and withdrew it from the lock. On it were scrawled the words, "Key of roll top desk," in a crabbed handwriting, somewhat unlike the subscriptions on the other keys. "An alien note," said Poirot, frowning. "I could swear that we have no longer here the personality of Mr. Marsh. But who else could have been in the house? Only Miss Marsh, and she, if I mistake not, is also a young lady of method and order. Baker came in to answer to the bell. You fetch Madam your wife and answer a few questions. Baker departed and in a few moments returned with Mrs. Baker. In a few clear words, Poirot set forth the object of his mission. The Bakers were immediately sympathetic. I so want to see Miss Violet done out of what's hers, declared the woman. Who hard would be for the hospitals to get it all? Poirot proceeded with his questions. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Baker remembered perfectly witnessing the will. Baker had previously been sent to the neighboring town to get two printed will forms. Two, said Poirot sharply. Yes, sir, but for safety like, I suppose, in case he should spoil one. And sure enough, so he did do. Us had signed one. What time of the day was that? Baker scratched his head, but his wife was quicker. Why, to be sure, I had just put on the milk for cocoa at 11. Don't you remember? It had all boiled over on the stove when us got back to the kitchen. And afterwards, 'twould be about an hour later, us had to go in again. I've made a mistake, says old master. Not to tear the whole thing up. I'll trouble you to sign again. And us did. And afterwards, master gave us a tidy sum of money each. Poirot reflected. After you had said signed the second time, what did Mr. Marsh do? Do you know? Went out to the village to pay tradesmen's books. That did not sound very promising. Poirot tried another tap. He held out the key of the desk. Is that your master's writing? I may have imagined it, but I fancied that a moment or two elapsed before Baker replied, yes, sir, it is. Has your master left the house? Have there been any strangers in it during the last 3 years? No, sir. No visitors? Only Miss Violet. No strangers of any kind been inside this room? No, sir. You forget the workman, Jim, his wife reminded him. Workman? Poirot wheeled round on her. What workman? The woman explained that about 2.5 years ago, workmen had been in the house to do certain repairs. She was quite vague as to what the repairs were. Her view seemed to be that the whole thing was a fad of her master's and quite unnecessary. Part of the time, the workmen had been in the study, but what they had done she could not say. As her master had not let either of them into the room whilst the work was in progress. Unfortunately, they could not remember the name of the firm beyond the fact that it was a Plymouth one. We progress Hastings, said Poirot. Clearly, he made a second will and then had workmen from Plymouth come to make a suitable hiding place. Instead of wasting time searching here, let's go to Plymouth. Sorry, but this is not an ideal setup. With very little trouble, we were able to get the information we wanted. After one or two tries, we found the firm employed by Mr. Marsh. Their employees had all been with them for many years, and it was easy to find the two men who had worked under Mr. Marsh's orders. They remembered the job perfectly. Among various other minor jobs, they had taken up one of the bricks of the old-fashioned fireplace, made a cavity beneath, and so cut the brick that it was impossible to see the joint. By pressing on the second brick from the end, the whole thing was raised. It had been quite a complicated piece of work, and the old gentleman had been very fussy about it. We returned to Crabtree Manor in high spirits, and locking the study door, proceeded to put our newly acquired knowledge into effect. It was impossible to see any sign on the bricks, but when we pressed in the manner indicated, a deep cavity was at once disclosed. Eagerly, Poirot plunged in his hand. Suddenly, his face fell from elation to consternation. All he found was a charred piece of stiff paper. But for it, the cavity was empty. Sacre! Cried Poirot angrily. Someone has been before us. We examined the scrap of paper anxiously. Clearly, it was a fragment of what we sought. A portion of Baker's signature remained, but no indication of what the terms had been. Poirot sat back on his heels. His expression would have been comical if he had not been so overcome. I understand it not, he growled. Who destroyed this? And what was their object? The bakers, I suggested. Pourquoi? Neither will makes any provision for them, and they are far more likely to be kept on with Miss Marsh than if the place had become the property of a hospital. How could it be to anyone's advantage to destroy the will? The hospital's benefit? Yes, but one cannot suspect institutions. Perhaps the old man changed his mind and destroyed it himself, I suggested. Poirot rose to his feet, dusting his knees with his usual care. That may be, he admitted. One of your more sensible observations, Hastings. Well, we can do no more here. We have done all that mortal man could do. We have successfully pitted our wits against the late Andrew Marsh's, but unfortunately his niece is no better off. By driving to the station at once, we were just able to catch a train to London, though not the principal express. Poirot was sad and dissatisfied. For my part, I was tired and dozed in a corner. Suddenly, as we were just moving out of Taunton, Poirot uttered a piercing squeal. Vite, Hastings! Awake and jump! Before I knew where I was headed, we were standing on the platform, bareheaded and minus our valises, whilst the train disappeared into the night. I was furious, but Poirot paid no attention. Imbecile that I had been, he cried. Triple imbecile. Never again will I vaunt my little gray cells. That's a good job at any rate, I said grumpily, but what is this all about? As usual, when following out his own ideas, Poirot paid absolutely no attention to me. The tradesmen's books, I have left them entirely out of account. Yes, but where? Where? Never mind, I can't be mistaken. We must return at once. Easier said than done. We managed to get a slow train to Exeter, and there Poirot hired a car. We arrived back at Crabtree Mansion in the wee now hours of the morning. I passed over the bewilderment of the bakers when we had at last aroused them, paying no attention to anybody, for Rose strode at once to the study. I have been on a triple episode about 36 times one, my friend, he deigned to remark. Now, behold. Going straight to the desk, he drew out the key and detached the envelope from it. I stared at him stupidly. How could he how could he possibly hope to find a big will form in that tiny envelope? With great care, he cut open the envelope, laying it out flat. Then he lighted the fire and held the plain inside surface of the envelope to the flame. In a few moments, faint characters began to appear. Look, mon ami, cried Poirot in triumph. I looked. There were just a few lines of faint writing, stating briefly that he left everything to his niece, Violet Marsh. It was dated March 25th, 12:30 p.m., and witnessed by Albert Pike confectioner and Jessie Pike married woman. But is it legal, I guess? As far as I know, there is no law against your writing your will in a blend of disappearing and sympathetic ink. The intention of the testator is clear, and the beneficiary is his only living relation. But the cleverness of him, he foresaw every step that a searcher would take, that I, miserable imbecile, took. He gets two wheel forms, makes the servants sign twice, then sallies out with his will written on the inside of a dirty envelope and a fountain pen containing his little ink mixture. On some excuse, he gets his confectioner and his wife to sign their names under his own signature, and he ties it to the key of his desk and chuckles to himself. If his niece sees through this little ruse, she will have justified her choice of life, elaborate education, and be thoroughly welcome to his money. But she didn't see through it, did she? I said slowly. It seems rather unfair. The old man really won. But no, Hastings, it is your wits that go astray. Miss March proved the astuteness of her wits and the value of the higher education for women, higher education for women by at once putting the matter in my hands. Always employ the expert. She has amply proven her right to the money. I wonder, I very much wonder what old Andrew Marsh might have thought. And